As of right now, almost everybody is talking about the potential of an upcoming US recession. This is a direct consequence of the new administration and all of the craziness around global trade. However, at the same time, we have this competing narrative that China is facing potentially even worse economic conditions. After all, most experts believe that the current tariffs on Canada and Mexico are temporary in order to get some kind of policy concession, but the ones on China, those are different. These are potentially long-term and intended to do real damage to the Chinese economy. That's why we have news like this where China is scolding the US for being two-faced, on one hand wanting a better relationship with them, and on the other hand, economically trying to crush them. Now, amidst all this uncertainty, China did just post a new growth target of, quote, around 5% for 2025. Now, compared to China's previous growth rate in the 2010s, this is a massive reduction and an indicator of the slowing trend over time for the growth of the Chinese economy. But even this number, in the context of the current situation, is being viewed as very ambitious. And most economists believe that China will need to perhaps substantially increase economic stimulus in order to achieve this outcome. And that's especially if the trade war intensifies between them and the United States. And we also just got more economic news out of China, further reinforcing this narrative, because both Chinese exports and imports drastically undershot expectations. Exports in the January to February period rose 2.3% versus the expectation of a 5% increase. And imports surprised markets by declining 8.4% year on year. Now, when it comes to the US economy, here, things are also not perfect, with the Treasury Secretary recently saying that the economy could be starting to, quote, roll over.
Top 10% of Americans are 40 or 50% of consumption, and that is an unstable equilibrium. The bottom 50% of working Americans have gotten killed. We are trying to address that. We're trying to get rates down, and could we be seeing that this economy that we inherited starting to roll a bit? Sure.
According to him, there's going to be a natural adjustment as we move away from public spending to private spending. And this is in reference to the efforts of the government under the Trump administration to reduce government spending, the debt, and encourage private investment. But as Scott Bessent indicated here, there's going to be pains associated with this transition. And we just saw yesterday that layoffs for the month of February were a massive 172,000. And just today we got the info that last month the US economy added 151,000 jobs, which missed expectations. So it would appear that both the Chinese and US economies are experiencing their own set of challenges. But with that said, most economists would still agree that China is in the much weaker position here. Because if we take a look at GDP, the components are consumption, investment, government spending, and net exports. And between the United States and China, this is the breakup of their respective economies. We can see that within the United States, it is a consumption-led economy, representing almost 70% of total GDP, while investment, government spending, and exports are a much smaller slice of the pie. But when it comes to China, the economy here is drastically different, with a much smaller reliance on consumption, and instead we have greater dependence on investment and exports. And this is why tariffs can have such a negative impact on the Chinese economy, and why they're essentially at the mercy of US trade policy here. But when it comes to the challenges faced by the United States, they're mostly internal, with a purposeful effort to reduce government spending and increase the private sector investment. And tariffs also have the goal of reducing this trade deficit, which would be positive for GDP. So in short, while both economies do face real challenges, when we talk about the Chinese economy, it's mostly about external factors such as trade policy, net exports, investments, and with the United States, it's mostly about consumer confidence, layoffs, unemployment, those kinds of things. So while the US economy still needs to navigate things like trade shocks, fiscal pressures, ongoing inflation, it's still coming from a place of greater resilience compared to the Chinese economy, which is contending with weak consumption, a massive ongoing property crisis, and of course those all-important external pressures.